Hello, and thank you for joining us for this special symposium of the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission. Today, the fast track to new skills, enhancing workforce quality through certification. I'm Damian Mitchell. Over the next 2.5 hours, we'll discuss the successes and the sore points in pursuit of improving workplace quality. What's good for Jamaica and what's needed now? All this amid the pronouncement by the World Bank that in the context of the COVID pandemic, investing in the skills for the jobs of the future has become both critical and urgent. According to the World Bank, it is already clear that labor markets will emerge from the pandemic irreversibly changed. Many of the jobs that have disappeared may not come back. As firms begin to hire, many will seek new skills, and so upskilling and reskilling the population will be critical, not just for economic recovery and transformation, but also for equity and inclusion. Today, we're excited to present an expert panel to wade through the issues, dissect the proposals, and to respond to your concerns. But first, here's Dr. Damian Black, the Commissioner of the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, with an overview of the symposium. Dr. Black?
Thank you. Thank you, Damian. Good morning. I trust that the day has been going well so far. Today is a very important moment in Jamaica's development of its human capital. What we are speaking to in collaboration with our partners, the Maria from the World Bank Group, Latin American Caribbean Region Office, Jan from the Federal Republic of Germany's Federal Ministry of Education and Research, Jody and Biza, a local workforce development specialist with Heart NSTA Trust. We want to have a serious discussion on matters pertaining to skills development, matters pertaining to workforce development, matters pertaining to how is it that we can transition the present workforce, given some gaps, challenges there with productivity, etc., access to appropriate and quality learning experiences, and then certainly the whole matter of having that certification recognized. One of the challenges that we recognize is the fact that whilst there have been many studies, how do we translate those studies, research findings, into practical benefit for Jamaica? And so the World Bank Latin American Caribbean region recently executed and then certainly launched the findings of a study they did, the fast track to new skills, lessons from Latin America and the Caribbean. And so we want to use this as a basis for our conversation today. And so we truly appreciate the fact not only your presence in guiding us through and to moderate the discussion, but also these eminent persons who will help us to share their perspectives on workforce development from throughout perspective from the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, and as well from Germany. And certainly there are some distinct differences in economic performance, where we are, resource availability, how do we scale, what might apply there to here. But part and parcel of the process as education professionals is that ability to translate learning and experience from one context to another. So we want to look at this through the lens of Jamaica, whilst appreciating the value that we can achieve through this process. So we want to thank you, Damon. Thank you to all who are joining. And then certainly we look forward to a very good day. Thank you.
And thank you too so very much, Dr. Black. Well, you've said it, and earlier I said it too, that we do have a very august panel for this March to engage you. Maria Marta Ferreira is a senior economist at the World Bank, Latin America and the Caribbean region. She is among our panelists. At the World Bank, she has led a comprehensive study on higher education in Latin America and the Caribbean. As part of the study, Ms. Ferreira has conducted research on the large-scale effects of admission and funding policies in the region, and on the recent evolution of higher education markets in specific countries. And don't miss your opportunity to pose your questions to our panelists by placing them in the comment section of your platform. But for now, here is Maria Marta Ferreira, senior economist at the World Bank, on skills development, what works in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Well, thank you very much for that generous introduction, Damian. Good morning to everybody. It's a wonderful, it's a pleasure to be here with all this audience, and I am very happy to present this new study from the World Bank. Let's make sure that we can indeed share the study here, the slides. Damian, could you please confirm that you can see my slides?
Yes, we are.
Perfect. Okay, very good. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today presenting the Fast Track to New Skills, short cycle higher education programs in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is joint work with my World Bank colleagues, Lili Dinarte and Marina Bassi, and with Professor Sergio Ursua from the University of Maryland. Okay, so first of all, let's clarify what are short cycle higher education programs. In our region, we have two kinds of higher education programs. On the one hand, bachelor's programs that tend to last between 4 and 6 years in the region. And on the other hand, short cycle programs that last 2 or 3 years. And I want to be very clear about this. The short cycle programs that I'm going to be discussing today are higher education programs. This is ISET 5, level ISET 5 in UNESCO. And these are programs that last 2 or 3 years. It's not 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months. And so they go by different names depending on the country and the region. Sometimes they're known as technical or technological programs. In other places, they're called as short programs, tertiary programs. And in the United States, they are known as associate's degrees, and they are taught usually at community colleges. And so what is distinctive of these short cycle programs? They are more practical, less theoretical than bachelor's programs. They're eminently oriented to the labor market. They may give a pathway to continuing towards a bachelor's program. And depending on the country, they are offered by universities and or other institutions. Now, these programs are a great promise for Latin America and the Caribbean, and that's because they form skilled human capital fast in 2 or 3 years. And they do that in traditional fields, the fields where this program started, like electronics, hospitality, nursing, but also in more innovative fields, such as app design, cybersecurity, data science, or nanotechnology. They are attractive to many students. For instance, students who perhaps don't have a lot of interest in a bachelor's program, or they don't have time because they have work or family obligations, or maybe they don't have the economic resources, or the academic readiness to undertake a bachelor's program. But they are also attractive to students who are seeking new skills, maybe even after a bachelor's program, or a person in his mid-30s, early 40s who is looking to change career, who needs a new job. In other words, they're attractive to a very wide array of students in many different circumstances. But importantly, they are also attractive to employers. And World Bank surveys tell us that finding qualified employees is a real struggle for about a quarter of employers in the world, but about a third in Latin America and the Caribbean. Our region is the one that struggles the most to find qualified workforce. And that clearly tells us about a mismatch between the educational system and the kinds of students and graduates that the educational system produces and that which the firms are looking for. Now, all of these things, all of this promise of short cycle programs that was definitely true before COVID is especially true right now. We know that our region has been the hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this pandemic not only created the loss of jobs and GDP, but it also accelerated underlying structural changes in the economy. Things that were already happening are just happening faster now because of the pandemic. For example, the rise of automation, the use of electronic platforms, the dominance of analytical skills. We see that many jobs have disappeared, but many other jobs have nonetheless appeared. And throughout what we see is just a greater demand for technical skills. At the same time, our countries are facing very severe fiscal constraints. So we are facing the challenge of forming new skills without new fiscal resources. And that's why short cycle programs could be a wonderful response, because they could do the job of forming those skills fast, in 2 or 3 years max, and also efficiently. Nonetheless, these programs carry a stigma in our region. It's not the dream of most families to have their children graduate from a short cycle programs. The bachelors are seen as the gold standard to economic and social mobility. So this is an issue that we have to grapple with, and we're going to return to it throughout the presentation. So what does the evidence say? In our region, we've had a great higher education expansion in the new millennium. And so here we're going to look at higher education gross enrollment rate, which approximately measures the fraction of individuals between 18 and 24 years old who are enrolled in the higher education system. And we're doing this for all the regions of the world in 2000 and in 2017. And we see that higher education has expanded worldwide in the new millennium, but the growth in our region has been nothing short of staggering. Gross enrollment rates have more than doubled throughout the region, and this is a very fast expansion by international standards. So this expansion is good news. From the point of view of higher education access, this is clearly good news. At the same time, and in spite of that expansion, the region has relatively few students in short cycle programs. So here we are going to be looking at, among all higher education students, what percent is specifically enrolled in short cycle programs. And we do it once again for all the regions of the world, 2000 and 2017. And we see that in our region, that percent was already low, and it's even lower now. It's about 10% of all higher education students. And so this tells us two things. First, that big expansion in higher education was really biased towards bachelor's degrees and away from short cycle programs. But it also tells us that this little dominance of the short cycle programs perhaps is responsible for part of that mismatch between what the higher education system produces on the one hand and what companies and firms need on the other hand. Interestingly, the students that gravitate towards these short cycle programs tend to be more disadvantaged and less traditional than the students in bachelor's programs. So when we compare those students, we see that in our region, short cycle program students tend to be a little older than bachelor students, a higher fraction of women enroll in these programs, a lower fraction of students that live in urban setting, a higher fraction of students who are married or who have family responsibilities, who work while they study, and a higher fraction of students who come from low and middle income households. In other words, short cycle programs promote the inclusion of students, both into the higher education system and later on in the economic and social life once they graduate. Also, short cycle programs, in spite of the disadvantage of their students, have higher completion rates than bachelor's programs, perhaps because they are more practical and more oriented towards the labor market. So here we're going to be looking at completion rates in the region, and we see that for the regions for which we have for the countries for which we have comparable data, short cycle programs tend to have higher graduation rates than bachelor's programs, and the same thing is true for the region on average. Why is that? It's interesting to have these higher completion rates again, because the short cycle programs tend to attract more disadvantaged students. And why is that? It's probably because they are more practical, less theoretical, shorter, eminently oriented towards a clear goal, which is the labor market. Also, from the point of view of the labor market, graduating from a short cycle program is better than starting and not finishing a bachelor's program. So here we are going to be comparing labor market outcomes by educational attainment, starting with the unemployment rate. So we are going to compare labor market outcomes for 5 groups of students: those who just finished high school or secondary education, those who started and did not finish a short cycle program, those who started and finished a short cycle program, those with an incomplete bachelor's, and those with a complete bachelor's. And clearly the unemployment rate for short cycle program graduates is relatively low, and it is lower than the unemployment rate of those who started and did not finish a bachelor's program. And we see a very similar pattern when we look at the formal employment rate. And of course, we know how serious the informality of employment is in our region. And when we look at the additional wage relative to just a high school or a secondary school diploma, we see that those who complete a short cycle program on average in our region make about 45% more than those who just finished high school, whereas those who started but did not finish a bachelor's program only make at 28% in addition to high school graduates. And these results are very important because they are telling us two things. First off, that it is better to graduate from a short cycle program than just to have a high school diploma, but also it is better to graduate from a short cycle program than to start and not finish a bachelor's program. And again, this is important because this type of students that starts but doesn't finish a bachelor's program, those are half of all higher education students in our region. Again, half of all higher education students in our region start and don't finish a bachelor's program. So it has to be the case that at least for some of those students, starting and finishing a short cycle program is a better option. Now, I want to be very clear that even though the average outcomes for short cycle programs are good, when you look among short cycle programs, there is great variation. Some of them are very good and others not. But the same thing is true about bachelor's programs. So I want to show you some indicators of that variation. And we are going to look at total lifetime net returns for short cycle and bachelor's programs in Chile. In other words, for a given program, for example, technologist in agriculture, how much more over a lifetime does the graduate from this program make than if she has just remained with her high school diploma? That's what we call the total lifetime net return, and it's net of the cost of obtaining that particular degree. And we're going to do this looking at the different fields of studies. And so the first thing that we see is that on average across short cycle programs, these average returns vary, and they vary by field. For example, they are relatively high, almost 50% for engineering and technology, but not so high for education or humanities. So there is variation across fields for the returns to these short programs, but there is also variation within field, as we can see when we look at the 75th percentile versus the 25th percentile. But the same thing is true when we look at bachelor's programs. So much so that your average short cycle program in engineering and technology gives you higher returns than the vast majority of bachelor's programs in education or in humanities. In other words, the returns to higher education programs, short cycle and bachelor's, are very, very diverse. They depend on the field of study, they depend on the institution where you acquire your degree, they depend on the particulars of that program. And this is something to be very mindful of as we think of expanding short cycle programs. Something else that is very interesting about short cycle programs is that they have a very dynamic supply, very responsive. So here we're going to look at some indicators for short cycle and bachelor's programs using data for Colombia, starting with the average program life. In other words, how many years on average go by since a program is first offered, first opened, until it's closed. And so we see that that's about 7 years in the case of short cycle programs, but it's almost twice as long in the case of bachelor's. Likewise, when we look at the percent of new programs per year, in any given year, about 21% of the short cycle programs are new. They just opened that year, much more than the case of bachelor's. And in any given year, about 17 or 18% of the short cycle programs are closed, much more than bachelor's programs. In other words, the market for short cycle programs is much more dynamic, much faster than the market for bachelor's programs. Why is that? Because short cycle programs respond faster than bachelor's programs to the needs of the local labor market. And so, for example, if in the local market of Bogota in Colombia, employers need this year specialists in nanotechnology, we are more likely to see new short cycle programs opening in response to that need than new bachelor's programs. Why is that? Because they're shorter, they're easier to set up, they work under a different structure. And so this is a very important feature of short cycle programs, especially now when our economic environment is changing so rapidly. Now, as I said before, only some programs are good. only some short cycle programs are good. And the question is, what makes a good programs good? And what do I mean by good? I mean, a good program is a program that gives good outcomes to the students, good returns, good employment prospects, good graduation prospects, adjusting for student characteristics. In other words, even if they don't take good students to begin with. Turns out that answering this question is hard, but to answer this question, we designed and implemented a unique survey in the world, the World Bank Short Cycle Program Surveys. And so we interviewed more than 2,000 program directors in the region, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Dominican Republic, in Ecuador, and in Peru. And we obtained a very high response rate of 70%, which is quite remarkable because half of this survey took place during the pandemic. And so this survey covers a very broad variety of topics. Program directors answer questions about students, faculty, curriculum, infrastructure, cost, legal regulation, institutional governance, links with industry, job search assistance, competition. They also reported the average academic outcomes of their students and the average labor market outcomes. In addition, for some of these 5 countries in the survey, we gained access to student level data. And so we learned some fascinating information from this survey. One of the things we learned is that these short cycle programs are connected with the private sector. And this is one of the reasons why they can respond so dynamically to the needs of local employers. In what way are they connected? So here I'm going to show you the percent of programs that connect with the private sector in each of several ways. For example, about 90% of the programs we surveyed have some kind of agreements with firms for students to do internships. Many of them collect data on how their own graduates do in terms of employment. Many of them have firms, the local firms, involved in the design of the curriculum and the evaluation of the students. About 60% of these programs go to the local firms and ask them, what do you need? What do you need me to produce for you? Or they lease equipment from the firms. They also go and ask the firms, are you happy with the graduates that we're producing? Do you think we need to tweak something in the curriculum? And in many cases, the firms are also helping train the teachers of the programs. Furthermore, the short cycle programs we interviewed are also involved with helping the students find jobs. How? Well, by giving them information about vacancies and the labor market, by training the students for their job interviews, by coordinating the job interviews with the firms, or by running an employment center, special office on campus that receives the employers and lets the employers interact with the students. But the bottom line is that these short cycle programs are connected with the private sector, and this is something that we don't often see with bachelor's programs. Now we have, through the survey, all of this information on what is it that programs do, their practices in terms of faculty, links with industry, job search assistance, and so forth. But we also have information on how the graduates do in terms of employment, salaries, graduations. And so with all of that information, we can answer the question of what do good programs do? And the answer, after a lot of statistical work, is that graduates from short cycle programs are more likely to obtain formal employment, and they obtain higher salaries when they have attended programs with some very well-defined characteristics. First, these are programs with links to industry, as I described before, that provide the students with job search assistance. They're not just waiting there for the kids to find jobs, they provide the students with job search assistance. They have adequate infrastructure in the form of labs, workshops, and equipment so that the students can do practical training. They provide academic remediation during the program. The students that come to these programs very often need academic remediation. These are students who haven't done very well in elementary and secondary education. But if you give too much remediation before the program, the kids get frustrated, they get bored, and they just leave. And so it's important to give them this remediation during the program. Programs that teach numerical competencies tend to be more successful and that provide a pathway towards a bachelor's program. Students don't like it when the program is a dead end that closes the door to a future bachelor's program. But also when the program hires faculty with industry experience, because that's the kind of experience that is relevant to the students. So in other words, the good programs are not random programs. They are programs that apply very intentional practices. They are programs that ask the companies, what do you need? What's the profile that you're looking for? And that based on that response, they work backwards, thinking about what kind of program will be useful to that local employer. And having this information, of course, can help us improve the programs that are not good, but also create or replicate the programs that are good. And so in a good system, only good short cycle programs would be offered, good for students and for the employers, and students would have the interest, no stigma, and the means to attend those programs. And so the question is, how can we move towards that kind of system? How can we build a better system? So let's quickly talk about policies for a good system. The first is information. Collect and disseminate information on short cycle programs and bachelor's programs. Very often students don't know the short cycle programs give very good outcomes, and they think that only bachelor's programs do. They go to bachelor's programs, and as I said, half of them don't even finish the bachelor's program. So students need to know information at the program level on short cycle and bachelor's programs. And so that requires some back end and some front end work. On the back end, governments need to collect student level data, if possible, beginning with the high school exit examination, following students throughout higher education and into the labor market. So that's the back end of the data work. And then on the front end, we want to have a website where students can go and find for every single program, short cycle or bachelor's, that is offered in the country, find information about the program content. What is this program about? For students, it's quite easy to imagine what a lawyer does, but it's not really very easy to imagine what an app designer or a radiologist does. So tell them what the program is about, how much it costs, what funding options there are, but also give information about the average wages and employment outcomes of the graduates from that program so that prospective students know what they can aspire to. And this information is very important for students early on in secondary education, when the students are 13, 14 years old, so that they start thinking about it. But this information is also very important for the regulator. It's very hard to regulate a system when you don't know how the individual programs are performing. And so, going more into the job of the regulator. From the point of view of oversight and regulation, it's very important to look at labor market outcomes. In our region, we have a tradition of regulating the higher education system based on inputs. Do we have enough full-time faculty, for example? And that's good and necessary, but we also need to look at labor market outcomes, especially when we're thinking about short cycle programs, which are labor market oriented. And so outcomes, are people finding jobs? Are they finding good jobs? And we can be more specific later on in the question and answer about what type of indicators we could be looking at. Also important to conduct annual evaluations and publish the evaluation. So accreditation tends to happen every 5, 10, 15 years, and that is necessary, but we really need to be following these programs year after year in case we need to make adjustments. And we also need to have a flexible regulation because these programs need to open and close and be updated very flexibly and very fast. So we also need to have a flexible regulation. And job number one is to prevent the existence of programs with poor student outcomes. Also, we have to help finance short cycle programs. In our survey, we learned that the main reason why students abandon these programs is financial struggle. And that should not surprise us because these kids do come from very disadvantaged backgrounds. And so, because the region is not exactly flush with fiscal resources at the moment, thinking about additional resources for short cycle programs might not be possible. And so this might call for a creative reallocation of the existing higher education funding. Why is that? Because at this time, on average in the region, per student subsidy in higher education is higher for students in bachelor's programs than in short cycle programs, even though students in bachelor's programs are less needy financially than students in short cycle programs. So we have a higher education system that is regressive and that is also not efficient because bachelor's programs have higher dropout rates. And this is per year. It's not even over the total duration of the program. Also, currently, higher education funding doesn't depend on the field of knowledge, even though some fields of knowledge, typically the technical fields, are more costly to provide. And also, some fields are strategically more important for the country than others. Also, at the moment, per-student subsidy is rarely available for students in private institutions. Governments fund students in public institutions and they fund the institutions themselves, but don't really provide funding for students in private institutions, which, for the region as a whole, that's about half of all short cycle program students. And also, that funding that we're giving right now does not depend on labor market outcomes. So governments are funding both programs that work from the perspective of labor market outcomes and programs that don't work. And also, we have to facilitate academic pathways. And I know that we're going to be talking much more in the symposium about this, so I won't say very much here, but the idea is to facilitate lifelong learning, a system in which students can perhaps do 5 or 6 months right now, work for a while, come back, do something else, work, and flexibly learn throughout their life. And so what we need to do is we have to think about a degree, short cycle or bachelor's, as a collection of credentials. And you're going to accumulate credentials, and the short cycle could be itself a credential towards a bachelor's program. And credentials are based on competencies, not necessarily credits completed. I know that J-TEC has been paying a lot of attention to this very issue recently. We need to be thinking about alternative badges, alternative credentials, badges, micro-credentials. We have to be thinking about online teaching, flexible schedules. This is very important from the point of view of inclusion. When we think about an inclusive higher education system, we are thinking about people who work, who cannot spend 4, 5, 6 years sitting full-time in a classroom in person. And so we go back to the initial issue. There is a stigma to these short cycle programs. However, we believe that in a system where there is information about all programs, short cycle and bachelor's students will be able to see that there are many good short cycle programs and many bad bachelor's programs. In a system where the regulator makes sure that only good short cycle programs based on outcomes exist, where there is funding for these short cycle programs, and where there is a flexibility of pathways, the short cycle programs would be much, much lessened. But the other issue is that the other thing that we're noticing is that students no longer seek long programs. And some of that could be a generational change, but the other aspect of it is the COVID-19 economic shock, that students simply cannot spend many years in higher education. They badly need to be working at this moment. And so at this critical juncture, our region is seeking different educational outcomes. But in order to obtain them, it needs different policies and strategies. We're not going to obtain different outcomes doing the same thing we've been doing so far. And it needs those different policies and strategies implemented urgently. That's why we believe that now is the time for short cycle programs. It's hard to believe, it's hard to think of a better time than now. If not now, when? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you too so very much. There is so much to chew on from what you have said to us, but you touched on a point that we are very interested here in Jamaica on, and that is the matter of funding. I note that you said that it is important that governments begin to look at the issue of creative funding for people who intend to pursue tertiary education. But what does a creative opportunity look like? I beg your pardon.
Yeah, so the creativity entails the following. We're operating under the assumption that there are no additional funds for higher education or workforce training. Ideally, we would have additional funds, but at this time of fiscal constraint, there might not be additional funds. So we might have to do more with what we have. And in that sense, it's important to perhaps reallocate funds towards programs that work, whether short cycle or bachelor's. Reallocate funding towards programs that work, that have good labor market outcomes, that are strategically important from the point of view of the economy, that develop the exact skills that the economy needs at this moment. And the funding, and it's important to think about funding of programs that are in private institutions. It might be that some of these highly successful programs are not offered by public institutions, but by private institutions. And so what's important is to fund things that work and to fund students that want to get access to those things that work. One possible model is competitive grants. So one could imagine a program whereby the government says, okay, so here I have these grants. I'm inviting the institutions to submit proposals for programs that would work, that would be strategically important, that would have a sound curriculum, that would provide employment. I invite you to submit all the information, a very sound proposal, and I, the government, will allocate funding based on your proposal. And then year after year, I'm going to see how you're doing to see whether I renew your funding or not. Ultimately, I'm going to evaluate these grantees based on their labor market outcomes. So that's a creative, for example, use of funding. But it's very important to start thinking about outcomes. We're going to fund things that work.
And then the other issue is that many people will pursue higher education for the purpose of improving their own personal qualifications, but also to earn greater salaries. Are you finding that there is a disparity in respect of the reality versus the expectation of pursuing higher education when you actually get into the workplace?
Yeah, so that's exactly what we show with the returns. That's exactly that big disparity in returns. Some higher education programs having high returns and others very low. That's exactly where the disparity lies. So everybody goes in thinking that they're going to obtain higher returns. That's not true for everybody. Why not? Because you might have chosen a program that is not in high demand. So it's very important when students choose programs, it's important to know what they're getting into. That's where the information matters. A website that tells me this program will give me a salary of this much. This program will give me a salary of this much. I might still go to a program that doesn't pay very well because I really love it.
Yes.
It might be that I decide to go into the classics because I love them, but at least I need to know what I am getting into. What we want to avoid is a student that spends a lot of money in a program that doesn't pay well just because she didn't have this information at the time she made a choice.
And then the other issue, before we go to Dr. Jan Renz, is this issue of the flexibility, how many businesses will accommodate their employees, for example, to go off and study while working or even as part of a special leave. Are you finding that this is a real concern in Latin America and the Caribbean? Flexibility of employers?
Actually, what we're finding is that the issue is not so much on the side of the employers, it is on the side of the institutions. The ones that really have to become flexible are the institutions. Have accommodating schedules, part-time schedule, flex mode provision, provide at night, provide at times that the students can work. And that's, of course, where the online teaching is so important. The student might only be able to study at 2 a.m. Okay, let's provide a program that allows the student to log in at 2 a.m., watch some presentation, perhaps have meetings with advisors. That's where the flexibility is really important. So it's flexibility on the part of the institutions, but also on the part of the regulator. The regulator is also the one who has to be able to say that kind of program is okay. Many regulators throughout the region will only accredit, for example, in-person programs that are delivered at 2 p.m. instead of the student being able to log in at 2 a.m. So it's flexibility really on the part of the higher education system, much more than on the part of the employers.
Great stuff. Lots more to talk about. But for now, we have to shift the focus a bit. And please don't forget to join in the discussion. You may pose your question to our panelists by placing them in the comment section on your platform. We have people who are watching on YouTube, on the Ministry of Education's website, as well as the website of the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission. We'll be going to Dr. Jan Renz in a short while, but let's look at this video. Well, while we wait for that video to come up, maybe we should go to Dr. Renz in the meantime. Dr. Renz is our second presenter. He is part of the super team at the Federal Ministry of Education in Germany and is a highly competent person in digital education. For the next 15 minutes, he'll give us an insight into the workforce development ecosystem in that European country. And remember to pose your questions and your comments for our panelists by placing them in the comment section on your platform. Here now is Dr. Jan Renz on workforce development ecosystem in Germany.
Thanks so much for having me. Let me share my slides. I think you need to enable them. Can you also display my slides? Yeah, perfect. There we are. So my name is Jan Renz. Good morning to Jamaica. Actually, it's dawning here slightly in Berlin, Germany. Thanks for the very interesting first talk. I'm trying to share a little bit the perspective of what we do here in Germany. And this is going to be mainly on 3 projects I wanted to shortly present to you today. I want to give you like a short resume of myself, and that's not because there's something fancy, but so I've worked in online teaching, I worked in building up MOOC systems, cloud systems, but the interesting thing is I worked over 20 years in research in the industry and 1 year and 3 days in the Ministry of Education and Research. And I think that's an interesting pattern because in the end, I think those worlds cannot be separate, but they have to be thought together, and the synergies in between these ecosystems have to be harvested. I'm going to tell you about 3 different projects. The Bildungsraum, which means the National Digital Education Space project, is the project which is where I'm part of the team. This is hosted by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. And this tries to build up a user-centric ecosystem for lifelong learning. And it has several sub-projects. Then the second project I'm going to briefly talk about is a project that's called Now. And this is from the Federal Ministry of Workforce and Social. And this is the first large platform from the Ministry of Workforce and Social. And if you do something in Germany, you can't actually do this without looking at the European perspective. And so I'm also going to tell you a little about the largest and most important European project, which is the Europass, which is hosted by the European Commission. And it includes a catalog of learning opportunities. As we just heard, it's important that you can find actually the offers so you can decide which is my personal learning pathway. And it also offers a wallet where you can store your credentials. You can write a machine-readable CV, and you can do self-assessments. So looking at the European level first before moving on to Germany. And there is a project called Europass, and it's been evolving for a few years now. And I'm very happy with the progress and the roadmap the project is tackling. But so it started really simple, where you could like have an electronic readable CV, and then it developed further. So you can now have your digital credentials in that system. So you could receive credentials from your school, or you could receive credentials from every other form of like educational institution. Then you can self-assess. So you can, for example, self-assess your digital skills, so you can better understand where am I, what is my gap, what maybe I need to add on skills and competencies if I want to do something special. Then you can explore your options. So what do I need? What is my opportunities? Should I go to another country in the European Union because they're actually looking for people like me? Can I volunteer? So basically it's about connecting all the single countries in the European Union. And I can compare and I can compare the different countries. So there is an aligned competency framework that makes it easy to compare like what I have to do if I want to move to Spain tomorrow. And this is something I want to recommend you to keep an eye on. Amazing project. And it shows us that it's possible that a lot of different countries actually align their interest and do something in common. And that's going to be a common pattern I'm going to talk about. Then we have the second project we're going to talk about, and that's NOW. That's the Nationale Online-Weiterbildungsplattform. So there's this one, the Federal Ministry of Work and Social. And I can't show you slides ready because actually this project is quite new. It's not officially launched, so they weren't able to provide slides, but they allowed me to actually give you a few insights into the project and what they are planning to do. The interesting pattern here is that the Federal Ministry and also the Agency for Work used to be the agency which felt responsible for like unemployed people and then let them re-enter into the labor market. And they changed this perspective, and they changed this perspective to become a mentor of someone in this lifelong learning, in this personal journey from university to then becoming a happy old guy and just doing education for fun. And what we've done with NOW is we're gonna actually, and how do you scale that? How do you scale mentoring? Because you can do that in person. So you have to do this with digital tools. So they're gonna build up a complete digital ecosystem where you're gonna have all the relevant offers, all the offers gonna map to the skills system, and you're gonna have amazing tools which allow you to self-assess. So what is my personality? What could be a job I can interest in? And then they can also map those qualifications with the impact on the labor market. So they basically can tell, well, this if you take this qualification, this will help you earn more money. As we heard before, there's something very important. So the third project, that actually is the project where I'm part of the team, is the Natural Education Platform. And we're looking at the labor market as one part of lifelong learning, and we tackle this with an ecosystem approach. So what we want to do is we want to create a digital ecosystem, a digital space for lifelong learning. So we want to connect all the different educational offerings that most of the time, some of the times, live in silos. And we want to create access to this for a large amount of people. And how can this be done? This can be done by common standards and interoperable structures. So the goal of such a digital ecosystem is based on standards, formats, but also on usability. So what we do is we take away, we don't look at the institutions in the first place, but we look at the user and we look at the user needs. Because if you look at the personal pathway that you do as your learning journey, you will cross borders of institutions, and you will sometimes even mix your roles. Sometimes you're going to be a teacher in the morning and you're going to be a learner in the afternoon. And digitalization allows us to create this ecosystem and create this connectivity. And so it's not a platform per se, so it's nothing that's a monolith, but actually we connect things. So we connect all the things that are there. Because what we've learned is it's not a lack of offers, but it's a lack of transparency, and it's a lack of connecting people who need, people who maybe already get an intrinsic motivation and want to learn, want to self-develop, and all the offers that are there. And so we can offer guidance, orientation, access, and also participation. And this leads the individual educational pathway from school to vocational training, including university, including formal training, but also including very, very low level, like from taking a MOOC to taking just a small nugget to learn from. Oops. So what are the functionalities we do have there? we need to connect people. Imagine like the internet. The internet works because it connects servers who offer something with clients who request something, and it aligns on actually how this data is used. And the internet is not on one server. The internet is on 1,000 servers, but you can easily access it because there is a common system behind it. And so you can access content, you can prove your competencies, and you can have your personal education profile, which then can be extended over the time. So you can collect badges, credentials, and plan and lead your own personal journey. And we all do this based on security and based on automation, because without automation, we can't scale. And so there are 5 different things on here. There's interoperability, usability, self-sovereignty, so you own your data. The German Federal Republic is not meaning to have like all your data. Your data belongs to you. So everything's going to be stable and secure. We're gonna watch at what's going on in the market, because we see so many things that are going on, from SSI to new data standards to new forms of learning and offers. So we need to monitor this. So this is not a project. What I'm talking about is a process. So this is something that's not built to be finished in 5 years. This is going to be built to be improved and optimized over time. And there are 5 different fields of action I wanted to share with you. The first thing is, if you move yourself from the analog in the digital world, you will need a digital twin. You will need to be able to identify yourself as a person, but also with your role. So are you a teacher? Are you a student? If you're a teacher, maybe you have access to additional data. And we do this by connecting the systems that are already there. So if I'm in the school, I already have an electronic ID in Germany. If I'm in the university, I do have an ID. If I'm in a company, I probably also have an ID. But now, if we connect those systems, you can use this ID with easily login on other systems. So imagine Google login or login with other systems. We make this able on every kind of devices. Maybe physical, but it also may be things that are hybrid. So you can find places to go to. And this don't have to be digital. You can go there in person. Maybe in the end, you will get a digital certificate, but the touch points are digital. So you find the project or the offer in the digital world, and you will return your certification in the digital world. One important part is, and we briefly talked about making offers findable before, is to have all the data available in one place. And so we do this by creating standards for educational data or adapting international standards, but also to have a place where all the data lives, and also data can also be accessed without going to a specific platform. We call this data spaces. This is a pattern from a European project called Gaia-X. And the idea is if we make it very transparent and easy to access, what are the jobs out there? What is the money you can earn there? How do you get to this job? So what have been the qualifications of people who have been employed in that job? What are the different things you can study? What are the different courses you can take? Everything freely accessible. So people can access it through our platform, but also other vendors and parties can use the data and build their own products on top of our data layer. So this is also an ecosystem. So we don't say we have the best solutions, but if we allow other people access to what we do on the different layers, we can establish an ecosystem. I talked about user self-sovereignty, and we do this by introducing a wallet, and a wallet that actually lives on device. So if you have a certificate, you can store your certificate on your device. It's going to be backed up. It's going to be synchronized throughout different devices. And you can actively share and say, who do I want to give access to that certificate? You can collect certificates and badges on your mobile, and you can stack them, for example. You can add micro-credentials, but you own the data. This is in Germany, where we are very specific about this. And then we create all the different services and provide the user one uniform interface. So nothing has to be reinvented by creating modularity. We can make it easier for people to access the JTEC market and reuse things that other people has already introduced. And as I said before, this is just the image to show you that we're looking at this lifelong learner journey. And what we do is supporting all the single steps of that journey. This is how it looks like in the first step. So we have a single sign-on. We have this personal wallet where you can store your credentials, share them. And we have this marketplace where you can easily take apps and integrate them into your offer. So if you now look at these 3 different projects, you can see they have a lot of in common. So there are wallets where you can store things. You have the content catalog. You have a lot of offers which you can switch off. You have the mapping to skills. Some are very specific. For example, the Now project, you're going to have only offers which are very well described. And then you're going to have our project where you're going to have a large catalog. So this is something where actually in the end, the user is going to decide, do he want something where he can be very secure about the quality of the offer, or does he want to be very flexible? And so what is needed to sum up? We need easy access to learning opportunities. We need easy access for service providers to issue badges and credentials. We must make it easy to store and share those credentials, have a common data space, make it easy to securely operate services, create interoperability, support vendors. So vendors and institutions are also an important customer. We do this by publishing everything that we do as open source and have a very good documentation and onboarding help. And we also introducing an environment for innovation. So not only the 100+ research projects we're currently supporting in this project, but we're also bringing innovation into the ministry itself. And we hope to have a lot of community engagement and contribution. And this is not without risks. So there are a lot of projects with the same scale that have failed. So how do we want to avoid that? By looking at risk management and trying to actually make small modules that can live and that can survive if other modules might fail. There is a challenge because ministries are not made to build and handle large IT projects. So we partnered up with people who hopefully can, but we're also going to change the way we act as a ministry. And we have to create a steady focus on actually what's needed and re-evaluate that, like from month to month, also throw away things. Sometimes even do 2 or 3 things at the same time and then decide for the pathway to go. So I'm hopefully in 2 or 3 years, I can come back here and report to you about how far we can come with that approach. Thanks so much for now.
Chuan, but let me ask you though, Dr. Renz, you reckon that for this issue of digital education, it really should be led by the ministries, or should there be more of a private sector lead on these?
It has to be an ecosystem that's completely open. So both for the different. So what we say is the part of the ministry is to create a basis infrastructure layer, and based on this infrastructure layer, then both other countries or ministry initiatives can do things on top of that, but also the private industries and attacks. The key idea is to make it really easy to connect those service providers with students and other learners. Because what we see in Germany is there is a pile of good things, but no one finds it. And for the attacks, it's really complex. So if you're like an attack with 10 people and you build something, you're never going to make it to the market because data privacy is so complex. Running your systems on the cloud environment is so important. How do you issue your credentials? How do you describe what the competencies and skills are that's part of your program? This is something where we can help. And that's a promise of the ecosystem.
You made a very important point in recognizing that connectivity is crucial for this digital education to happen. But how can this be fast-tracked in places like Jamaica, where there is still a problem with connectivity and access to internet for education?
That's a good question. And I think there are two answers on that. One is, even if like maybe teaching doesn't happen all the time online, maybe like you still have going to be databases to find things, you're still going to have digital credentials and stuff. The other thing is what I found out in research is even if connectivity is really bad, you're going to have places or times where connectivity is good. So this is a technology challenge. So you can also make digital offers work asynchronous. So what we introduced with one of the projects, which is used from the World Health Organization, is actually that we have online courses and you can click on the button and it will be downloaded to your device, and then you can go out in the fields to some places where you're not going to have connectivity at all. You can run it there, and as soon as you go back to a place where you're going to have connectivity, it's synced, so you're then going to get your certificates and stuff from the from the server. And maybe I can add to one of the questions from Nora Simahol.
Yes, she's asking in terms of what's needed. You mentioned that there is a need to store and to share credentials. And so she wants to find out what is the recommended strategy for accomplishing this.
Yes, there are two things here, two building blocks. One building block is providing a wallet where the user can store and share and make it very easy. So usability is really important. And this is something where we're going to see if this is something driven by the vendors. So Apple has a wallet, Google has a wallet, the European Union has a wallet. We're going to build a wallet. So probably there's some cleanup in the market, but I think we see a pattern here. If you look at COVID, it's now so, at least in Europe, it's so super common that you get your digital certificate for your vaccination status and share it digitally. And the World Health Organization just actually announced that they're going to make this interoperable through over 100 countries. So I think this is something that people will also demand if they do trainings, that they're going to have, give this certificate to me or this badge electronically and verifiable. And the second part is really make it easy for the institutions to issue. So issuing digital credentials should not cost money. We're going to cover all the costs. We're going to provide an infrastructure that makes it easy for every vendor, every service provider to issue a verifiable credential. And we're going to help them on board to identify how could they describe their offers, how can they match to existing skill and competency frameworks, for example.
Yeah, sounds much better to hear you saying you're going to be building a wallet as opposed to building a wall.
Yeah.
So let me ask you the question here, though. Do you find that there are significant disparities in access among the different social classes in your locale?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting. There's ongoing discussion in Germany where people say, oh, everything where you need a digital identity is critical. I think if you look at it, most of the people have access to internet and to devices, and they're starting in school now. And if not, you get support. So you get support to actually access it, or you can go to hubs. So I don't think so, but it has to be monitored. So that is not something that makes the smart 20% even smarter, but it's actually something that can access the long tail. That's something that is important, and good usability is part of that.
Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Jan Renz of the Federal Ministry of Education in Germany. Quite a lot on which we can consider. So we will be taking in a short while Julian Beezer, who is a practitioner in technical, vocational, and education training. But first, let's watch this.
Good day, I'm Gabrielle Thompson with an item of interest just in. The Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, J-TEC, is reporting that persons who have learned skills and competencies through experience are now able to get qualified. This is done through the Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition (PLAR) component of the Commission's National Qualification Framework of Jamaica, NQFJ. The PLAR identifies, documents, and assesses prior learning. Getting qualified through PLAR is for persons who have gained experience in various jobs and volunteer activities through a hobby, interests, independent study, or through training courses. Assessing prior learning takes into consideration your portfolio, results of a challenge exam, and your ability to demonstrate your skills. The benefits of this component of the NQFJ include eliminating learning duplication. It increases self-confidence in learners, validates learning through work and life experience, identifies areas that require further study, and encourages learners to pursue further communication. J-TEC says people who fall in these categories are capable of getting hired because they can actively demonstrate their skills through the portfolio of work they have developed. Stay tuned for more items of interest.
So go call mommy about this. So good. Hi, mommy. Were you watching TV? Yeah, breaking news just came in to say that you can get certified based on your experiences, skills, and portfolio. You remember when you were thinking about getting certified in domestic work? Yeah, well, you can contact J-TEC because you've been doing this for a very long time. All you have to do is visit their website at www.jtec.gov.jm, or you can call them at 876-977-5115.
Stuff there happening. So far, we've heard about what has been happening in Germany, Latin America, and other parts of the Caribbean. But right here in Jamaica, Old Harbour in St. Catherine, to be exact, is a success story. And Julian Biza is a practitioner in technical, vocational, and education training for more than 10 years and is the registrar at the Heart NSTA Trust with direct responsibilities for managing admissions, assessment, and accreditation for the College of Beauty Services. Mrs. Biza is with us today, and she has been at the forefront of a program in Old Harbour to train and empower residents there. Mrs. Biza, what's the scope of this initiative in Old Harbour?
All right, thank you for having me. Well, the scope of the intervention while I was a workforce manager with the Heart NSTA Trust is a prior learning intervention that was geared towards certifying self-employed participants in various skill areas. We could not have done this alone as the Heart NSTA Trust. So you know that it takes a community to build a community. So we had, in collaboration with the SDC, the Old Harbour Bay Community Development Team, which is the CDC, collaboration with UCAID, and of course the Heart NSTA Trust that focuses on training and certification for the program. Since then, the program has expanded to various skill areas. Initially, it was only for cosmetology, but it would have gotten some attention and the program would have evolved looking at other skill areas.
And what are these other skill areas you're now looking at?
Well, we had a variety of skill areas. Let me just list a few. We had hairstyling, barbering, business administration, customer service, housekeeping, digitization, as in document image technician, construction, food preparation, events management, just to name a few.
And this dates how far back, Mrs. Beazle?
This actually started in 2016 when we decided that we would have assisted in a corporate social responsibility initiative to rebuild the community center. So we actually went there as a team at the Heart NSTA Trust to repaint this community center in hope that it would have provided some form of training for the persons within the community.
Wow, and from that has evolved the success. How was
Yes.
I was elected in the first place, though?
It was selected based on the fact that the CDC would have reached out to us to say that they had a group of welding and cosmetology persons to be trained, right? We would have engaged some other entities because the community center was not adequate to train the persons. As you know, as I said before, it wasn't in a very good condition. We had goats running out of the community center, so on. And we decided that, okay, as a team, we're going to see how best we can assist with helping to develop this community center in somewhat a training center. So at the time, what we did was to engage salons. Shades of Elegance was one such salons, and other entities in partnership with the initiative just to get some training started. Having gotten the training, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
All right, having gotten the training started, you know that it would have gotten some attention. TSK would have been a company that recently come to the community center, come to the community, and what they decided to do to assist with the community, along with JPS, they decided that they would have offered a welding plant to the community center. In 2017, we decided that we would have done some customer service training with the persons because we realized that this is well needed. What happened is that persons from all walks of life would have come to the Odaba Primary School in need of training.
Right. You mentioned
over
that
350 persons would have showed up trying to get some form of training. And that would have gotten the attention of the media. And as such, the media came into play and the project got highlighted, and TSK decided that, hey, let us just assist with rebuilding the community center. So they would have donated 17.5 million in rebuilding the community center. And that's how we got the training started.
And you spoke earlier about the CDC, that's the Community Development Council, which hints at the partnership, which is so critical. How essential is this collaboration with the agencies and the companies in guaranteeing the success of community empowerment programs like the ones in El Harbour?
All right, so the CDC are really the foundation of the community. They are the one liaising on with the people. They are the one who understand the people, right? They are the one who speak on behalf of the people. So having them involved was very critical because they would have been the runners for us to go to the persons to say, these are the different programs that are available. They would have gotten all the applications for us, and we would have coordinated the training.
Is there still that stigma, though, Mrs. Beazle, that skills training really is for high school dropouts?
Well, there is the stigma, but you know, as TVET is getting more exposure, especially locally and on the international stage, and also given the pandemic, you know that everybody is trying to now gain a skill because everybody is looking for something that is lucrative that can help them to have something in the bag. As you know, skill is power. Once you have a skill, there is no taking it away from you. So you can turn it and make fashion, as you know that Jamaican people would have said, knowing that you have a skill. So it has now been rebranded somewhat to say that, listen, if you're an academic person, you need to have a skill so that you can rely on it when you have hard times. right?
Very well.
So as such, persons are really looking to either get recognition for the skills that they already have, or they are looking to enroll themselves in one of such programs to gain a skill.
And certification is critical in that too. But would there be a great advantage, though, in expanding skills training in high school?
There would have been a great advantage to the end that that's where the foundation is. And if we can start marketing skill development at a high school level, based on my experience, persons that are coming out of high school, they may not be able to even put together a resume, right? I believe that as competency-based training, you would be able to do practice, right? So if you take that approach in allowing people to practice what they do and preparing them for the world of work, they would leave the high school as a more competent and rounded person, ready to go into the workforce and also to access higher level to continue workforce development.
Well, we heard from Ms. Ferreira earlier on in respect of people taking up for the short cycle courses versus the longer ones. How difficult is it for you to retain the participants in your training programs?
Well, as you know, based on the pandemic, you have persons that want to access shorter programs, and the labor market research would have indicated such. So what we have done is to embark on advertising for job certification, which is a subset of the skill that you can actually get some form of recognition for a skill and to be able to go out there and work. And if you decide to pursue the skill at a higher level, then you can come back for the level 3 program that is also in alignment with a diploma.
And you find that this is sufficient to pique the interest to stay in the program and to keep...
Yes, because you gave them some exposure and then they realize how much money they can make. So they will definitely come back for more.
Aha, the sound of money. What would you say has been the greatest achievement, though, of the Old Harbor project?
All right, I would say that the greatest achievement of the Old Harbor project is to be able to certify approximately 420 persons. As persons would have known. Go ahead.
Since 2016.
This is 2016, and there's also some training still going on at the community center. So year to date, we would have impacted over 420 persons in different skill areas, right? As you know, the Old Harbor Bay community is one of those volatile community, right? So when we had the rebuilding of the community center, everybody left what they were doing to just take part because something good is happening in their community. Right? Persons were able to gain employment through the TSK canteen. Persons become concessionaires. The housekeeping personnel were able to cater to the international persons who came down to work by providing housekeeping services, right? So all the skill areas that were garnered were put to work, right? Mm-hmm. And as such, it would have been a success for me. And because of the different achievement, as I said before, the community center would have been rebuilt, which is a great achievement for the community that is also still serving skills training. We would have had several media coverages. Currently in the Old Harbor town, all the barbers there are now certified, right?
That's great.
And they were not able to go to school because, you know, that's their way of living, right? So the fact that we were able to go out and the fact that we were able to go out and certify them on spot and recognize the skill that they have would have given them that opportunity to realize their certification. Tears come to some of the person's eyes because they didn't believe that they could actually get some form of certification. Some persons were able to go overseas to create a better opportunity for their family. So this, in a nutshell, was a success in my view.
I was going to ask you, how do you measure your success? But certainly it has to do with the feedback of the participants in the program, I reckon.
Yeah, so I would say in my capacity, measuring success is to be able to impact human capital development. The number of persons I can train and certify, especially those who contribute to economic development, and also customer satisfaction, and also to make a difference in someone's life is basically how I measure my success.
And we can't talk about success without talking about the challenge. So what's your greatest challenge?
Well, one of my greatest challenge with this project was to really get the retention of the persons within the program. However, with the support of the community, who would have come together, provided lunches for these persons, would have made this opportunity free for them. So they would have gotten an additional sponsorship to help with light bills and so on. So they would have seen this opportunity as something to grasp. And the fact that some of them realize that getting a NVQJ qualification can put them on an international scale is just one attraction to getting a skill.
And from where you sit, what are the opportunities now to be pursued?
Well, as I said before, if I could tell anyone to get a skill, that is what I am promoting, because skill development is the ultimate goal to economic development.
And finally, for you, Mrs. Biza, what's that one big dream for the Old Harbor Initiative?
Well, my big dream for this Old Harbor Initiative is for it to become a community-based intervention, which is in the process. So in our local landscape, we would have called it a CTI.
Great. I wish you all the best, and I am confident that you will achieve even more in Old Harbor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mitchell, for having me.
Great. Thank you so very much. You've just heard from Jodian Biza, who is a practitioner in technical, vocational, and education training for more than 10 years and is the registrar at Heart NSTA Trust. Well, we will take a short break now to put you to see another of our videos. And then when we come back, we'll go even deeper into this symposium.
Do you have a skill? Do you have a certificate to show that you are qualified? A degree perhaps? Are you wondering what your qualification is worth? If so, you need to know about the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica, the NQFJ. I am Monique Price, and I'll be telling you about the NQFJ. It is a tool that classifies all qualifications in the country. It recognizes qualifications, knowledge, and skills. The framework describes for you what learners should know, understand, and be able to do on the basis of a given qualification. It was developed as a requirement of Jamaica's Vision 2030 development plan to assist in the transformation of Jamaica's education sector. There are several benefits of the NQFJ. It allows your qualifications to be recognized in other countries. It means if you earned your qualification in Jamaica, it can be legally accepted and easily recognized in another country. It shows the equivalency of qualifications across learning sectors and regions around the globe. It increases access to higher education through flexible learning pathways that recognize formal, informal, and non-formal learning. It sets standards that evaluate the quality, validity, and relevance of qualifications. There are 10 established qualification levels, ranging from Access 1, which is basic, to doctoral studies. The NQFJ covers all learning sectors including general, secondary, technical and vocational, and tertiary education. Plus, it allows for the development of prior learning assessment and recognition, as well as credit accumulation and transfer systems. All qualifications placed under the framework are national qualifications provided by entities legally operating in Jamaica. For further details on how the NQFJ works, please visit jtec.gov.jm or call 977-5115. Go higher, move up the levels with the NQFJ.
Great stuff. You will agree that there has been an exchange of extremely interesting information since we started this morning, but a critical plank relates to regulation. So then let's welcome Dr. Damian Black, the Commissioner of the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, J-TEC. He'll introduce the J-TEC regulatory framework for workforce development through certification. And remember that you can pose your questions and comments for our panelists by placing them in the comment section of your platform. Over to you, Dr. Black.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. And again, just waiting on the slides to load. But as you have indicated, the morning so far has been quite informative. I really want to extend the word of appreciation to Maria and Jan and certainly Jodian for sharing of their experience and certainly guiding us in very practical ways insofar as the matters before us are concerned. I want to acknowledge well, you're not seeing my slides, I take it. Good. Okay, good. Thank you. They're up now. So I want to acknowledge, as we said here, the importance of the issue of enhancing Jamaica's human capital. I think that education has been in the news for a variety of reasons. And even as we are having this symposium, the Honorable Minister is before the Standing Finance Committee, just reviewing, going through, receiving questions and responding in terms of the budgetary allocation to the Ministry of Education and Youth. And so the government, as we would note, outside of the Ministry of Finance with respect to allocation to clear and manage our nation's debt, education, the Ministry of Education and Youth receives the single largest allocation. And so this is appreciated, and it does demonstrate, as we note, government's focus and emphasis on education. And so I want to just highlight and indicate that these are the areas that we want to look at in our presentation this morning, looking at human capital development, educational outcomes and performance, that is to say, how have we been doing with a particular focus on workforce certification, and then looking at the fast track application in Jamaica. Maria gave an excellent overview of that project that was undertaken in Latin American Caribbean region. And whilst it is that it focused primarily on countries with Spanish and Portuguese, English speaking, French, etc., were not included. The point, though, is that the data, there is applicability for the lessons for the simple reason that we share some common experiences. And looking at the four areas, we want to see exactly how they relate to the Jamaican context. And then what's next? This then speaks to treatment of our approach here at Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission with respect to the oversight and the guidance, regulation of the field. So when we speak about human capital development, one of the things that we just have to note is this is absolutely fundamental if it is that we hope to transition meaningfully in keeping with the goals, the vision of our 2030 Jamaica National Development Plan. Certainly we wanting to emphasize the issue as to having a world-class quality education and training system in place, and then the role and the contribution of the various stakeholders as we transition to this desired state. Human capital development in terms of the Jamaican experience is widespread, happens in many contexts. We certainly heard from Jodian a short while ago, Mrs. Biza, in terms of the workforce development focus, the community interventions that she has participated in and that continue across the length and breadth of this country, not only through Heart NSTA Trust, but through other agencies. Our education system, moving from early childhood all the way to the tertiary or higher education level, it has many achievements, but then also there are some areas of challenge and issue. But we do have a very dynamic sector, and then the various subsectors and their focus, and then how they do what they do. So we've got to appreciate that dynamism The World Bank in and of itself has a human capital project underway, and this one seeks to assist nations in their development of their human capital. When they speak to human capital development, this is something to note, that it consists of the knowledge, skills, and health that people invest in and accumulate throughout their lives, enabling them to realize their potential as productive members of society. So investing in people, this is what we speak of when we talk about human capital development. And critically, it's just to show that we're not just speaking here about education, but the various dimensions of the human being, so that we can help them to realize their potential as human beings. And this is absolutely important. The government of Jamaica, through Prime Minister Holness in 2020, established a Jamaica Education Transformation Commission to review Jamaica's education system. This was in 2020. The report was recently launched in January of this year. And they spoke to a number of areas. This slide here highlights 5 elements in the preface to the report, highlighting and indicating the areas that need to be focused on, speaking very broadly. And then they proceed to establish a number of recommendations which show that they extended themselves, they applied themselves to a review of the entire education system, all levels, and made some significant recommendations, some of which they did indicate were reminders from the 2004 task force, things that they felt had not received sufficient attention nor action. And so they spoke to this critically. But in looking at the first 2 points here, organizational coherence and systemic alignment, it speaks to the fact that from their perspective, that in very many instances, the education system functions in silos. It functions in silos, doing things that very often are at odds with the overall goal of seeking to achieve the establishment and operation and maintenance of a quality education, world-class quality education and training system. And so this has to be noted. So as I said before, there are many players. You just heard from Mrs. Beezer of Heart and Estate Trust. There's Jamaica Center of Tourism Innovation. We partnered with them, and they participated in one of our seminars in January, which focused on their experience in certifying workers. Certainly, the Council of Community Colleges, CXC, City and Guilds are representative of other entities that certify and make academic awards or qualifications available to individuals upon the successful completion of education and training processes and solutions. And so when it is, we're speaking though about, when we look at all of this infrastructure, and when it is that we are addressing ourselves to what it is that we want to do, it's important that we appreciate what has been happening. And so I just want to focus, particularly as it relates to this issue, on the matter of the number of individuals who, according to the 2019 Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions, the number of individuals in the prime working age population who are without certification. And this is a point that needs to be made, and we need to remind ourselves of as we have these sort of public fora. We're speaking here about persons between 24 and 54 years of age who have no certification at all. You know, sometimes we speak about this and we think we're talking about who have no post-secondary or tertiary education qualifications or higher education qualification. No, this is just a statement, 65.2% of individuals without any form of certification at any level. Now, yes, as somebody reminded in a session that we had the other day, that it could very well be, as happened with a relative of hers, that there may be individuals who have completed some training, are yet to receive a certificate, have not gone to collect, you name it. These things do happen. But the point, though, is these are individuals who, in response to a question, part of the survey indicated that they had no certification. And this is concerning. The Ministry of Labor and Social Security, in a report that they did called Employment Opportunities for Low-Skilled Workers in Jamaica, indicated that The industries, and this is critical, which previously required little or no trained workers, now need persons with technical skills. So fast, rapidly diminishing, rapidly in our rearview mirror, appearing in our rearview mirror, are the days, the concerns, the consideration of engaging individuals who are not trained or who may be trained but have no certification. And this, colleagues, is a critical matter. The transition has begun. It's occurring at a rapid pace. And where we are, especially as we migrate a lot, it can present challenges to these individuals when they do go overseas. The capacity of the modern economy to absorb persons who may be trained and without certification, who are not trained, and then obviously have no certification, etc., or little or no training, is going to be a situation or a reality where these persons are excluded. Or if they're able to participate, then it could be situations that they face of underemployment and critical challenges to productivity and their own ability and capacity to continue. So underemployment and/or unemployment, then this impacts the economy and organization through low productivity. There's a significant skills gap. There's an inability to navigate the labor market. Certainly the income will be constrained, lack of access if it is that you want to advance further, to receive additional education and training. And so this represents a major dent in our ability to develop our people, to develop our human capital. Weak socialization, the challenges that we see sometimes in our crime and the social violence, we have got to be concerned about these issues. So although the focus in terms of that 65.2% has to do with the persons in the prime working age population, beg your pardon, and would therefore, from our perspective and from the formal data and approach to seeking and identifying these individuals, would be within the workforce. But critically, there is another group, NEET. These, another way to describe this group, unattached youth, disadvantaged youth, but these are individuals who are not in education, employment, or training. And they also were highlighted within the Patterson Commission report, that is to say, the Jamaica Education Transformation Commission's report. And there is an urgent need to deal with and to attend to this block. Mrs. Biza was speaking to some within this category a short while ago, and certainly we will speak a bit more. So when we look at the study, Fast Track to New Skills, that was done by the World Bank, and in looking at it, when it emerged, when it came out, I was struck by it. Its lessons and applicability are significant to Jamaica, and we stand to benefit if it is that we can appreciate. I saw from Dr. Renz's presentation as well, from Jan's presentation, that some of the issues there are also realized and appreciated. So, for example, Jan spoke in terms of funding, oversight, learning pathways, just the whole matter of information provision. These are the four basic elements and fine areas of focus from the Fast Track to New Skills. So it is recognized that developing skilled human capital is a fundamental role of higher education systems. There is a focus primarily now, and coming to appreciate that if it is that we want to achieve learning that is significant, and thus for persons to be able to apply, then we have to flip the model on its head, because we tend to emphasize learning that occurs in formal contexts. And what this slide is indicating is that on-the-job learning that is lasting, or learning that is lasting, really occurs on the job. And 70% of it, coming from the perspective of the Center for Creative Leadership, really ought to operate or occur on the job. Certainly near the job, that is to say coaching, mentoring, and some other issues that we can look at briefly, 20%, but the off the job or e-learning or classroom context, 10%. The greater focus should be on the job training, And so whether it is, as we stated a short while ago, when we talk about near job, apprenticeship, coaching, mentoring, job rotation, job instructional training, understanding, you name it. These are some of the elements associated with on-the-job training. So I want quickly to look, and I come back to this matter of on-the-job training, because what it actually, the implication of this and how we have got to fine-tune the system here in Jamaica has to do with the matter of certification and how the certification that might arise from on-the-job training is to be recognized. This is going to be critical. So the provision of information from Maria spoke to this earlier is critical. What this means is that learners, students require appropriate information to make decisions about the options, career paths, their selection of education and training opportunities. Where do they go? How do they apply themselves in context? How do they apply themselves in context? At Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, we have piloted, we're in the second actual opportunity of piloting, a program called Ready for Next. Ready for Next. And what this is a program developed for high school level or secondary level students between grades 9 and 13, but to provide some information to them to help them to define a career plan. And this is absolutely important, because the data that we saw coming out of our research, whether it is the student satisfaction survey, the annual survey of the performance of tertiary education institutions, and then certainly the feedback that we heard from the institutions in other contexts or outside of our research efforts, indicated that many of the students were unprepared for tertiary education. This is not just from an academic perspective. This has to do critically with just information, career selection, which then influences the programs that they may apply to. Funding, how do they negotiate the funding jungle out there? How do they secure the funding through scholarships? What are the opportunities for scholarship assistance? You name it. But also against the background of additional research that shows that sometimes, even when you have the scholarships provided, that it is exceedingly difficult to be able to move on, because there are other costs associated with the pursuit of tertiary education. And so the provision of information is something that is absolutely critical. And we accept that as being part of the approach to the oversight and guidance of the development of Jamaica's tertiary education space as a regulatory approach. Secondly, we want to acknowledge the matter of the funding inequities. Data that we have indicate, one, from first year to second year, 79% of the cohort is retained. The 21% fallout typically tends to arise because of financial challenges. USAID, in association with FHI 360, the Advanced Program, in 2019 published a study focused on the barriers to access for technical tertiary education in Jamaica. Funding was a critical one. There are other elements of the findings and the issues that were highlighted that speak to the whole matter of information, as I just indicated a short while ago. But the funding is critical. Funding is critical. And so we know that the ministry has developed programs to expand scholarship, to expand grants, to expand the financial assistance available to students at the tertiary level. And then certainly another one which has been in the news having to do with the Sixth Form Pathways program, in terms of providing another option to individuals to begin their tertiary education in the upper levels of the secondary school system, so that a foundation is provided. So this has got to be noted. When we speak about oversight and regulation, one of the things that we have got to recognize is that we have had from time to time instances in Jamaica where persons have, to use a term, been scammed by less than ideal training situations, by institutions that offer programs that are not ready not fit for purpose, not based nor driven by standards. And so in participating in many of these, they are challenged as to their ability to utilize the certificates that they receive to be able to move on. That is one dimension of it. There will also be situations where you have got to help persons to negotiate the various pathways, the approaches to learning, etc., and just to provide this information. So one of the things, therefore, that we certainly are doing is monitoring the institutions that are in the Jamaican education space to ensure that they are within our purview, and then secondly, to then move them from that list that we maintain of their having been seen as operating and offering post-secondary, offering tertiary level or higher education qualifications, to then be able to have them registered. And so this is something that we are intent on doing. We have had additional resources to help us to be able to move on. So there is the monitoring, close performance of the tertiary sector to ensure that persons are able to achieve and receive qualifications that are worth the while. The other matter is of learning pathways. Learning pathways. We have heard a lot of this recently, and it cannot be avoided. We know and appreciate, for example, about the institutions that are prominent in the tertiary education space: universities, teachers' colleges, community colleges, private and public sector entities at various levels. Institutions that have a long-standing, institutions that have been registered, they have programs that are accredited, or they award certification that is accredited but not necessarily in their own name. And so we understand this space, but part of the challenge that we face is how can persons, particularly, and I go back to the issue that I raised earlier about the workplace being a context of training, that on-the-job training very often is of such high caliber. They receive their certification, however, persons are turned away at the door when it is that they seek to advance in their career or profession, to advance personally, professionally, where they have all of this learning, but it is not acknowledged. And so one of the videos you saw earlier about prior learning assessment is one of the tools, one of the flexible learning methodologies that are out there within the space that we can recommend to institutions to be able to use this to review someone's learning and then to be able to validate that learning by the assignment of credits, academic credits that they may use as they seek to move on. So how do persons negotiate the various learning pathways? Am I speaking about learning pathways? One, we have the traditional academic, which I just mentioned a short while ago, the universities, the colleges, and so on. There's general education pathway, typically up to the higher levels of the secondary school system. There's a technical and vocational education training pathway that was just mentioned, occupational studies pathway, and then of course there is lifelong learning. These are all credible. And in saying they're all credible, you may then be saying, but yeah, we know that when we talk about the universities and colleges, we know that when we talk about leaving the secondary school system with CXC qualifications such as CAPE, CSEC, and so on. But when we go into the lifelong learning, that's where it becomes murky. But what we are focused on at Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission is the affirming learning pathways where the methodologies can be applied to assess learning and to be able to convert that learning into evidence to support the grant of academic credits, which can then be used to help persons to advance. Not only to advance within a particular field, but then also, should they so desire, to advance across the pathways. Thus, somebody who might be, as we saw in the video, in the domestic space, a helper. Somebody within that space who might be able to utilize the credits on the basis of their learning to be able to move on to another area. And this is entirely possible, entirely credible. And we certainly want to assure the Jamaican population that this is something and a direction that we need to go if it is that we want to achieve the goals associated with human capital development. So when we talk, therefore, about the next steps, we are presently embarked on establishing a coalition of various parties to be able to work along with other agencies within the government of Jamaica who are involved and focused. So we just heard from Heart and STA. We know there's JCTI, focused on the tourism and hospitality industry. There's Jamaica Social Investment Fund. There are the tertiary education institutions, a variety of players who are out there training and educating. But there's also the training and education capacity and processes underway in private sector firms, you name it. These are all part of the space that we need to look at and to be able to bring them into this. So it's a network for workforce certification. Jan spoke about it earlier in terms of the German model. Maria spoke about it in terms of looking at the gaps that need to be addressed if it is that we seek to advance. Within this network, we want to be able to establish systems where persons can make connections with credible trainers, credible providers, to be able to see the outcomes of those training processes. Jan spoke about wallets, etc., Jamaica credit accumulation and transfer system that we would hope to institute to make sure that we can capture the information so that persons can easily access this data on the training record so that they can utilize it as they move on. So this network is going to be critical. As we stated before, using quality assured flexible learning pathways to deal with the problem about the certification of the learning. Learning, once it occurs, it's credible, it satisfies standards, it can be certified. So the existing quality assurance structure can easily accommodate micro-credentials as the certificate related to workforce context are usually called micro-credentials, badges, credentials. Again, Jan spoke to this, somewhat different from the short cycle programs that Maria spoke to, but can be incorporated within that rubric and heading as well. And so we do need to appreciate quality assurance arrangements are diverse. And this is something that we intend to address through the provision of standards, through the provision of training, through the provision of methods to certify providers, to certify trainers, to certify persons in the use of prior learning assessment. And then to be able to have these persons as part of the provision and the capacity in Jamaica to help our persons to move on. Some of the issues that we face would be data collection and indicators. So the extent to which when you look at micro-credentials and because the system is used to external quality assurance such as accreditation that really focuses a great deal on the capture of significant data, outcomes-based data, to be able to define whether or not programs and institutions are achieving their designed end, whether or not they're fit for purpose, whether or not they are aligned and conformant with the standards-based approach to quality assurance, the standards by which they are being assessed in terms of their capacity to do. And so this is an issue that we will have to look at as we fine-tune the process and as we move along in establishing a pilot. We want to be able then to take those lessons and to apply them, because critically we understand that it can be a very costly exercise, but it cannot be the application of this present system to many of the players, because some of them are small scale, some of them are based in organizations, as we noted. And so therefore we have got to appreciate that whilst affirming quality, the quality standards to assure that the certification fit for purpose, but we also need to acknowledge the difficulty in establish common curriculum requirements and so on. One of the things that there was recently in the press, a reference to a major company in Jamaica's corporate landscape that had established a corporate training system called a corporate university. And, just the other day, I overheard somebody speaking about her having had access to the training provision and sounded so excited, beg your pardon, as to just being able to tap in to the learning opportunities there. What we have got to do is to be able to ensure that they can utilize those qualifications that emerge from them, the certificates, to be able to move on. But this is the sort of the ecosystem, this is the sort of the network that we seek to create in Jamaica through the Ministry of Education and Youth for the benefit of the Jamaican people. The role of the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica, as I close, is going to be critical. Why is this critical? Because we are speaking in terms of being able to map the qualifications that come through micro-credentialing, badges, credentials. And by the way, when we speak about credentials, this covers a broad array of certificates or qualifications, all the way up to degrees. But the point is they can be smaller chunks of an overall program so that persons can have these. And then, as I said before, to be able to use the credits to advance. And so, one, defining the standards that will be utilized to quality assure from a regulatory perspective, the providers at various levels, from the universities all the way through to education and training providers who might be making awards offering training that grant awards from other providers such as the CXC, the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica, and maybe other entities, the traditional ones, ACCA for accounting and some of these other provisions, but also training arms within organizations, within companies that offer training that lead to certificates. The standards are there, and to be able then to define and guide institutions as to how they should approach the various requirements in establishing their training programs, and being able to then award these certificates, which, once we see them, can be mapped, placed at the appropriate level in the National Qualifications Framework, and be recognized as a legitimate qualification in Jamaica. They would then have to go on for accreditation, with the University Council of Jamaica, for example. But then this is all part of the mix in terms of ensuring that we're able to do this. Secondly, we want to be able to train and certify prior learning assessment practitioners and providers to be able to ensure that persons can utilize these skills to assist our people in a credible way, to be able to say, this is the nature of the learning, and this is the certificate that accords with that learning, and thus the credits that I have received. And the third thing, which has to do with, once it is that the evidence of that learning has been appropriately composed and archived, it can then be made accessible to all and sundry through the appropriate credentials, badges, micro-credentials, etc., through a platform that will assist their mobility. Because I know that as Jamaicans, we are significant migrants. And so we participate in immigration, we travel a lot to seek income generation opportunities, and thus this can certainly help and assist. And then critically, it then all comes together. It all comes together in terms of the external quality assurance mechanism of accreditation through the appropriate body where this is concerned. So we want to be able to say to private sector persons, employers, trainers, providers of training and education opportunities through the traditional face-to-face, the hybrid models, or exclusively online. We want to be able to pull all of these things together. And the basis of this will be a standards-based approach, to regulate the entities through that, the regulation of the trainers and providers through training and certification, and then monitoring as we move on, and then to facilitate the archiving of that, the evidence of learning, and then fourthly, to ensure that within the system, everybody has something that is accredited and credible. And so we want to just note this and to just acknowledge it as I hand back over to Damian Mitchell at this particular point in time.
Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Black. So many matters on which to follow up, and we will do so with the comments of our other panelists right after this.
Good day, I'm Gabrielle Thompson with an item of interest just in. The Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, J-TEC, is reporting that persons who have learned skills and competencies through experience are now able to get qualified. This is done through the Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition (PLAR) component of the Commission's National Qualification Framework of Jamaica, NQFJ. The PLAR identifies, documents, and assesses prior learning. Getting qualified through PLAR is for persons who have gained experience in various jobs and volunteer activities through a hobby, interests, independent study, or through training courses. Assessing prior learning takes into consideration your portfolio, results of a challenge exam, and your ability to demonstrate your skills. The benefits of this component of the NQFJ include eliminating learning duplication. It increases self-confidence in learners, validates learning through work and life experience, identifies areas that require further study, and encourages learners to pursue further communication. J-TEC says people who fall in these categories are capable of getting hired because they can actively demonstrate their skills through the portfolio of work they have developed. Stay tuned for more items of interest.
So go call mommy about this. So good. Hi, mommy. Were you watching TV? Yeah, breaking news just came in to say that you can get certified based on your experiences, skills, and portfolio. You remember when you were thinking about getting certified in domestic work? Yeah, well, you can contact J-TEC because you've been doing this for a very long time. All you have to do is visit their website at www.jtec.gov.jm, or you can call them at 876-977-5115.
Well, thank you so very much for staying with us for this very special symposium of the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, the fast track to new skills, enhancing workforce quality through certification. We've heard some very interesting presentations, and we're opening up now for a few questions before we have to close in another 10 or so minutes. Dr. Black, let me begin with you, coming on the heels of your presentation. Compliance with international convention relevant to education is one thing, but operation is another thing. How do you assess the efforts of tertiary institutions themselves in ensuring that Jamaica remains sensitive to these international conventions?
Okay. Monitoring is one tool that we use. That is to say, we would receive evidence of any challenges through the media, for one, as person may complain, that is one. But secondly, persons speak to us directly. And then thirdly, because as I'd indicated, we engage in process of inspection and registering of institutions, then by virtue of that approach, we're able to see and appreciate what is happening. But that is one dimension. And that inspection registration process is guided through our standards, regulations, and institutional support division. Another division, our international relations and qualifications division, they address matters primarily related to the qualifications that are awarded, right? And so what they do is that they hold sensitization sessions with stakeholders to introduce them to the various aspects of our national qualifications framework of Jamaica, the assessment and placement standards, how we do what we do, and how it is that we can assist them to ensure the continuation of quality. Third area, in terms of keeping our ears to the ground, has to do with the policy planning and research. Now, I mentioned two of the studies that they do. The annual survey of the performance of tertiary education institutions, and then secular and national student satisfaction survey. And the information gleaned through these two instruments provides us with significant information as to the extent of conformance and compliance with standards and what are some of the challenges being faced. So those will be some of the things that I want to mention at this particular point in time.
Yes. Well, again, the issue of funding came up, and probably here I want to bring in back Ms. Ferreira from the who spoke to us earlier in relation to this matter of funding. Is there hope that there can be any improvements in relation to tertiary funding as the COVID pandemic comes to a close, we hope?
Well, everything depends on the economic recovery. It's a chicken or egg problem. Whether there is additional funding really depends on how the countries can recover. That's why at the bank we do talk about a reassignment of funding in higher education that might be needing, along the lines of what Dr. Black was suggesting regarding the correction of inequities, and to use funding to correct inequities, but also in a performance-based kind of fashion, which is in any event the most efficient way of using funding. In other words, fund that which works for the students and for the employers. And that ought to be the guiding principle on how to use our higher education funding.
And so then let's go over to Jan in a moment, because this issue of the use of technology in the pandemic, many places in the world were using technology at a much higher pace than they would have in any other time in our history. Did we make the best use of the opportunity?
That's a good question. Probably yes, kind of. But the important thing here is that I think it gained a new awareness. What we've seen in Germany, for example, is that we have 16 federal states, and in the pandemic, they realized that they cannot work alone and tackle everything. But they started to collaborate. They started to one state is building something, and the other is going to use it. They started to build together, and this is not only sensible in terms of cost. This is also very interesting in terms of mindset. So tackle things together. And I think this is probably one of the rare good things that comes out of the pandemic.
Yes. Dr. Black, can I bring you back in the discussion here? Because there's also an area that will relate to you, though, in respect of your own monitoring and exploiting technology for that. I mean, has this pandemic taught you anything in respect of how you seek to engage your customers, to monitor them, for example?
Well, certainly the utilization of meeting platforms is one that has forced us to, the pandemic has forced us to, all of us really, I think, but rethink how we do what we do. And so that is one. But secondly, I believe it was Jan who spoke in terms of the matter of looking at the risks associated with the model in Germany. And one of the things that I think has emerged is greater focus and emphasis on risk management and appreciation of the broad risk environment that we're about to treat with. And so looking at how we do our inspections, registration visits, etc., and how we engage our clients utilizing technology is one. Increasing the technology in terms of the receipt of the information to be able to process and then to be able to assist us in making the appropriate decisions, the risk profile of the institutions, and then the environment within which we operate. And then certainly looking at the standards themselves to ensure that they adequately treat with and deal with the what is required in the regulatory or quality assurance space, given that regulation is one quality assurance mechanism. Those are really the things that I want to highlight at this time.
Right. And let me just continue on that matter of quality assurance, because this whole pandemic also showed up some of the weaknesses in relation to accreditation and assessment, ensuring that they are following the standards which are set down by the respective institutions. And of course, you would have to be monitoring them. Did you find that there was a greater risk? And if so, how was it monitored?
Well, at the very outset in March, was it 2020, of the pandemic and certainly its impact here in Jamaica when the decision was taken to cease face-to-face instruction. One of the challenges that arose was just the unpreparedness of institutions to transition to a learning space that was primarily technologically mediated. And this is understood. I mean, if day in, day out you are functioning face-to-face, I mean, that tends to be it. So that is one. But not just institutions themselves in terms of the technology, but then also the faculty. Faculty were woefully unprepared in many instances, not all, but in many instances. And the institution just had to take the time to make that transition in terms of the training and so on. One of the a critical thing that emerged as part of the discussion was whether or not the degree earned during this time is the same as the degree earned subsequently.
Yes.
So that came up as a discussion piece. But critically, they had to transition in terms of their assessment approaches to be able to assure the quality of the learning outcomes. So these are some of the things that we had to negotiate. But for the most part, in terms of what we saw in evidence, the system held up fairly well. There was those first few months when the shock to the system, the going to the learning platforms in a context where connectivity was already challenged, the provision, bandwidth, I mean, a whole host of issues. And so persons were utilizing platforms like WhatsApp, etc., messaging platforms to be able to just do the teaching, learning, and to facilitate it. So we have had to look at that. And so when I said earlier about looking at our standards, we have had to tweak and presently tweaking to be able then to address some of the issues that have emerged for us. I don't know what the others would have to say to that.
Yes. Well, let me go to Maria Pereira, because the issue of job cuts also impacted tertiary training and pursuit of tertiary programs. Certainly here in Jamaica, there were many students who decided that they had to call it quits, at least for the moment, because their parents were out of jobs. Are you expecting to see lapse somewhere in the short to medium term in respect of the workforce quality because of this?
That's an interesting question. That's a very interesting question. It's possible, but it's not. So what we do know in the economic literature is that when graduates enter the market during an economic shock, they suffer what's called a scarring effect. In other words, throughout their lives, their labor market careers are just below, so as to speak, the careers of everybody else. Why is that? Because they started at a lower position. They had to take whatever was available. And once you start at a lower position, your next employer knows that you were at a lower position. So he's not going to give you the same job that he might have given to that graduate that entered the market when the market was tight, and he could be selective about which job to take. So this scarring effect is a very robust finding in the literature, and what we expect to see is a very serious scarring effect in the whole region. And the other thing that we know from the literature, and that we've seen specifically in Latin America, is that this type of crisis tend to hit unskilled workers more strongly. And so the combination of the scarring that all workers suffer and the fact that crises tend to hit unskilled workers more strongly, all of that calls for even more work on our part, the kind of work that J-TEC is doing, the kind of work that Jamaica and so many other countries are doing, really trying to upskill and reskill the population. Ultimately, that's the only insurance against this type of crisis and against future crises. Because fortunately, this one might be ending, but we know there's going to be another one. It's just a matter of time. So we have to be prepared for it.
Which brings into sharp focus then this proposal by Dr. Black for on-the-job training as academic credit. Dr. Renz, what do you make of this?
I think this is an interesting perspective, and this is, I think, a good natural finding if you shift perspective. And I think these are, you always have to tackle things from both sides. So you have to look at the individuals, but you also have to look at the labor market. And I think the fit is bigger than we probably sometimes think. And so the question is how can we foster this? And I think the approaches I've heard and Dr. Black's topic and talk look very, very promising. At least I've learned a lot from the German perspective, and that's a good sign.
Yes. Dr. Black, are you getting any take up for this?
No, yes, this is something that many persons have wanted for quite a while. The issues that I try to highlight here and from our perspective, one, the size of the providers that you've got to factor in, because, in many instances, the training on the job in some organization, their size and that capacity. But the critical thing, though, is that you're not abandoning an approach based on standards. You see, they've got to be assessed against some standards that then define whether or not it is credible. So who is doing the training? What is the content of that training? Are they demonstrating the learning associated with it? So it is not some just carte blanche, do anything, and then you just present something and you just move on. It is a formal system. It is a process that has to be acknowledged. But the point I'm making is that individuals receive significant training, and the studies are showing that critical learning occurs on the job. Critical learning occurs on the job. And so it is ensuring that we build together a process that is credible and that can result in qualifications that the market will receive as such.
Well, we're almost entirely out of time, but I'd like you to complete this sentence for me as we come to a close, and we'll begin with you, Dr. Renz. For the fast track to new skills to happen, we must keep the path, keep on the path we started, and have follow it and readjust if possible, if needed. Very well. Ms. Herrera, for the fast track to new skills to happen, we must
be daring, dare to innovate, be very daring.
And Dr. Black, for the fast track to new skills to happen, we must
apply the lessons that other contexts have thrown up. So we have heard from Maria in this great study throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. We've heard from Jan in terms of what's happening in Germany. So let's learn from each other. That's it.
Well, so many things now to replay, to renew, to reinforce as we move closer to Vision 2030 to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. Again, thanks to our panelists, Maria Marta Ferreira, Senior Economist at the World Bank, Dr. Jan Renz of the Federal Ministry of Education in Germany, and to Jodian Biza, Registrar Hart NSTA Trust, and of course you, Dr. Damian Black, Commissioner of the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission. You really have all been very outstanding. But the biggest thanks goes to you for joining us on this very important discussion wherever in the world you are. I'm Damian Mitchell. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.